Good afternoon and welcome to today's structured conversation. My name is Carrie Klima and I will serve as your moderator today. On behalf of the SAAL Professional Development Committee, I thank you for participating in today's structured conversation and an extra thank you to our guest speakers. A few logistics before we get started. You must have a YouTube account and channel to participate in the chat dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you do not have a channel, there's a link to create one. I encourage you to participate in today's discussion by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through chatting. We would also like you to be aware that there is a delay between our conferencing technology and the YouTube broadcast. Please bear with us as it takes a few moments for us to respond. We will get to your questions and comments, and I will chat in the information of technology as well. Our presenters today for the Mixed Methods Assessment and the 2017 SAAL Professional Development Needs Assessment are Marylee Demeter, Nicole Long, and Stephanie Mims. And as you read, we have quite a few outcomes for today's structured conversation, and we want to just highlight a few key important ones. So you'll be able to understand the rationale for employing a mixed methods in student affairs assessment. You'll be able to analyze and combine qualitative and quantitative results to provide recommendations that inform decision-making. And we'll get a chance to learn about your professional development needs and how our PDC is using the results to bring you opportunities to learn about topics important to you and the work that you all do. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to have Nicole start us off with talking about why we would use mixed methods.
Good afternoon and good morning to everyone who is listening today. There are a number of reasons why we might use a mixed method approach with regard to student affairs assessment. Essentially, mixed methods approaches allow us to integrate data using various methods for that data collection. We can collect quantitative and qualitative data simultaneously when we use a mixed method approach, or we can start with one or the other first to inform the other. So for example, if you start off with a quantitative methods approach, then we can follow up with a qualitative approach so that we can answer questions related to why. Why are students reporting certain responses? We might also start with a qualitative method first, and that might inform your instrument development. Particularly if you're piloting new questions, that can be helpful. But essentially, when we think about quantitative methods tend to allow us to focus on trends. It provides us with more breadth, so you can focus on a number of different topics in a survey instrument or other means of data collection. With qualitative methods, they help us to understand complex phenomena, helps us to do a deeper dive into a particular topic, often having a more narrow focus, but it allows us to essentially cover more depth in what we want more information on. As I stated before, mixed methods is really information rich in that you're able to acquire a lot of data about a particular topic or issue. And so now I just want to briefly touch on what are some of the different methods we might use regarding qualitative and quantitative data collection. Qualitative data collection may include methods such as interviews, survey comment boxes. Sometimes people forget that those are actually qualitative ways of collecting information when we ask someone to provide us more information, provide additional comments, and so forth. Observations from field notes. Focus groups can also be another great way to collect qualitative information from a number of different people all at the same time. Another source of qualitative data collection is also document review. Sometimes we have documents we need to review, like policies and so forth. When we think of quantitative data collection, our most often go to our surveys. So as I stated before, with quantitative data collection, it allows us to collect information on a breadth of different subjects and topics. Another quantitative data collection method can just be through observation. So this might be event attendance or counts of students who participate in services and programs. And this is also where we tend to use Likert scales as well through quantitative data collection, which can be really helpful, particularly if we have various scales that we're using from the literature on various topics such as motivation, time management, things of that nature. So I think now, as a panelist, Carrie, do you want to lead us into the next section?
Yeah. So Marylee and Nicole, you both have worked in various assessment offices at different institutions. Can you discuss a student affairs assessment project where you employed mixed methods?
Sure, I'll give Nicole a break and I'll talk about a little bit about a project I worked on when I was at Rutgers. We had our Office of Veterans and Military Services, and we had a significant veteran student population, and a graduate assistant in our student affairs program who was working with the counseling department was interested in whether or not we were meeting their needs and if programs and services offered were a benefit to them. Is this actually what they want? And are there any barriers they're encountering to these services? So we decided to use a mixed methods approach. We did a survey. We asked a lot about topics of interest, like I said, barriers. At the same time, we also decided to employ focus groups. We knew that, you know, just because they're saying, hey, I need help with X, we don't really know what that means. So in looking at the quantitative data, we saw a lot of reference to needing help with anxiety management, stress management, attention and focus, and relationship building. We did ask a lot of questions about substance abuse, and counseling used that on their end with their ADAPS program. But we really thought that this stuff was really interesting, and it's a great thing that we had focus groups going on, because when we talked to students, and we had a couple of different focus groups, and we did separate our transfer students versus our veterans who had been at Rutgers the entire time throughout their academic career. And when we met with them and we asked about, you know, dove in a little bit deeper, we found out it's not just the anxiety and stress of, you know, returning to school, especially when they have been in combat, and some of our students were suffering from PTSD, but they also needed help with relationship building, and not just with other students, but, you know, at home. You know, this is a non-traditional population. They're often married with kids, but we also found out that they felt very isolated from other students at Rutgers who were not veterans. And that was kind of surprising to us. We're like, why aren't they hanging around other students? So working between counseling and the Veteran Services Office, we noted a need for some more opportunities to get students together in one space. So by the end of that year, I know we had a barbecue, and we made sure that veteran students were invited. We got them engaged. And another thing we learned, we're just having some more availability in the evening for our veteran students. So employing both these methods, had we gone with the survey, we probably just would have been given, you know, workshops in anxiety management. We wouldn't have known about this relationship building piece and connecting them with other students. So it was really helpful.
Great, thank you. Nicole?
Sure. I can briefly chat with everyone about an assessment project we did at the University of Delaware. It's actually an ongoing assessment of our late night weekend programming initiative, Perkins Live Trabant Now. And it started off in 2015, this particular initiative to assist in providing opportunities for students to have late night weekend programming on nights where the high risk drinking is most problematic. What we did is we had a survey at the end of the programming series that included a number of quantitative types of questions, in addition to a number of comment boxes where students could explain or elaborate further on their responses. And this particular survey instrument addressed the programmatic issues. You know, did you feel like you could meet other students? Did this help direct you to other alcohol-free programming on campus? In addition to students' behaviors with alcohol. So, you know, asking students, how often do you drink and how much do you drink before you go to late night weekend program events or after you attend a late night weekend programming event? And we also wanted to know, not only did you think that this kind of programming was important to you, but why? And so had we not provided opportunity in that instrument for students to elaborate on why it was important, we wouldn't have learned a lot of information about really just alcohol climate at the institution. In addition to the survey, we also we know that we're only getting information primarily from students who attend such programming. So it's really important for us to just get more information from students who actually don't participate in late night weekend programming. So that can help us learn more about what are the experiences of those students, what kind of behaviors are they engaging in addition to, how do they perceive alcohol free programming on campus. And so what we did after the survey is we actually had some students help with this and train them on how to conduct interviews. And we just went around to find students who had not participated in the programming, and we kind of did some snowball sampling from there because it was really hard to do this all call of who hasn't attended this programming. So we worked with students in their own networks, and that was actually very helpful. One of the drawbacks, though, of doing the interviews is that students are a little bit more reluctant to talk about their alcohol behaviors one-on-one, particularly with me as an interviewer, since I work here on campus. No student wants to talk about engaging in high-risk drinking face-to-face with someone who is not their peer. So it was helpful in having peers involved in those interviews, more so than just me. But really, as a whole, by doing a mixed methods approach to assessing this initiative, we really got a robust amount of information, particularly around why such programming is important, even for students who do not participate. Just knowing that it's an option was of benefit for the students socially and personally. And for the students that did participate, one of the benefits was really just kind of knowing that the institution was putting forth so much effort to provide a space for students who don't want to engage in high-risk drinking. And also really thinking about how does alcohol climate relate to inclusion on campus, particularly for students who don't want to engage in high-risk drinking. So really, I think employing a mixed methods approach was really a smart idea for us, particularly for a new initiative. We wanted to make sure we got a lot of information about the experiences.
I think both of those examples really highlight the different ways we can engage in qualitative and quantitative. So it seems like you both use surveys, but then focus groups and interviews. And I think thinking about who's conducting those are really important questions. So thank you for sharing those examples. I think now we'll transition into talking about the mixed methods that we used for this project specifically and looking at the needs assessment for our student affairs leaders and our professional development committee and the process that we went through to launch the needs assessment and then analyze and now report our results. So we'll turn it over to Marylee.
So when I started chairing the Professional Development Committee in 2014, I started a little bit early. Our colleague Dan Bureau over at the University of Memphis in Tennessee just could not take on the responsibilities anymore. So I started a little earlier than I should have, and I'm thinking, okay, now I have to start scheduling all these structured conversations, and I'm saying to myself, what topics am I going to go on? I didn't just want to pull anything out of the hat. So I started poking around the board folder, and I found the 2013 membership survey. And wow, there was a bunch of information in there. Lots of Likert scales on regarding level of knowledge and expertise and experience in a number of student affairs assessment topics. However, by 2016, the data was pretty tapped out. At that point, Whitney Brown had been our chair-elect, and she and I were working together. And Whitney, hats off to you. You're doing a great job this year, and I'm really glad we were able to get this needs assessment done. But we both kind of saw the need for, we need something to inform our structured conversation topics, especially as assessment professionals. We like to use data to inform our decisions, so we needed something. We also have been working on revising our research source repository, and we thought this would be a great way to inform what more resources we can add there. And seeing other places such as like Assessment Commons with SA office assessment listings, we figured, hey, we can grab that information too. So I put together a little bit of a proposal draft that Whitney could share with the board this year. And she discussed that with the board. So I'll get into kind of how that went. But in the meantime, Dr. Matt Pastilli, Kristen Butcher, and I on the Professional Development Committee got together and we looked over that 2013 membership survey to see what do we want to do with this? How do we want to ask this? So we decided to restructure the items, and we also decided to add and delete some items. So I remember it was a while ago, but I know that there were a couple topics where we're like, okay, I don't think we really need to ask about this. But with new trends and new things happening in student affairs since 2013 and new ways of doing things, we thought, hey, maybe we should ask about your experience in this area, things like fidelity, equity, diversity, just kind of change it up a little bit and stay current. So as we were developing the survey and getting that together, that's when Whitney started to discuss administration with the board. So if we move on to the next slide, we had to not only collaborate with the board, but we also had to collaborate with the membership committee, because as discussions went on with the board saying, well, we're going to do membership renewals at the end of the year. And a lot of questions we're going to ask, especially the demographic questions, we're going to ask them again. We don't want to ask them twice this year. Survey fatigue, right? So how could we kind of do this where we're getting the information we need while we're also addressing our needs? So that's why we decided to do our membership renewal process early on during the summer instead of waiting till this time of year. And we do want to thank all of you that participated and shared your feedback with us. So again, we collected data via Qualtrics. Dr. Matt Pastilli, who was on the development team, after we put those Likert items together and we included a few qualitative items on the survey, he administered that through Qualtrics in conjunction with our membership survey. So now Nicole will talk a little bit about the analysis we went into.
So in order to analyze the data, I think one of the really great things that we did as a group was we used a lot of different people in the analysis, and that's actually something that is very important. I always say that we shouldn't analyze data in isolation, so it's important to make sure that we have a number of different people who are looking at data in order to make meaning of the data. So in terms of the analysis team, there were 4 of us from the SAAL Professional Development Committee, so Marylee, myself, Megan Bell, and our moderator, Carrie Klima. In addition, we are so grateful to have had the assistance of students from the Assessment and Student Affairs graduate course at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, participate in the process. Dr. Patrick Biddix, who is their professor, reached out and said, hey, I have some students in a class that could use this as one of their assignments and projects. So you'll hear a little bit more about that experience. And again, I think that was incredibly helpful. One of the leads from the class was Stephanie Mims, who contributed to this, and you'll hear her on the talk today as well. In terms of our analysis plan, we did a preliminary review of some of the data. And so the Professional Development Committee essentially reviewed some of the results in order to help us identify some of the structured conversations for the fall 2017 semester. And that was actually incredibly helpful. Again, we got a number of people looking at the results in order to make some determination around, what were some of the highlights for what our membership was thinking in terms of what kind of professional development do they need and how can we use structured conversations as a vehicle for meeting those needs. We also then analyzed all of the qualitative responses just to develop some of the basic themes and code the qualitative data for themes. And again, this is where the assessment course from the University of Tennessee really came in handy and did a lot of that work. And then additionally, summarizing all of our quantitative responses, Essentially, one of the highlights I think that you'll see in a few slides from now is a side-by-side display of what our membership stated they were interested in learning about, and then also their self-reported knowledge around each of those particular topics. And then we followed up with, I think every good assessment the project should do, is prepare some sort of an executive summary report with recommendations about how the data can be used in moving forward with regards to membership needs.
Thank you. So as we think of this process of setting up the analysis and the different teams and different folks that were involved in this, can you talk about if there was a specific order of data analysis that you all took here? So doing qual over quant first or vice versa?
I think for us with the preliminary analysis, looking at the quantitative data first was really helpful. We didn't, we started looking preliminarily. It was late July, early August. So, people are on vacation. How much data are we going to have? So it really helped to just kind of look at some of the graphs and just kind of even eyeballing, like, what are we seeing here? Where are folks saying they're knowledgeable? Where are folks saying they're interested? Along with that, though, and we'll talk a little bit more, but that's where it also kind of led me into, after that, I started looking around at the archives as another form of qualitative data to just help inform our results.
Do you think there will ever be a time where you should start with one specific analysis method, or do you think that depends on the assessment question?
Well, I definitely think it depends on the assessment question, which is probably not the most helpful response. But I would say if you don't know a lot of information about the topic, or even the participants or those who you anticipate will participate in your assessment, it can be really helpful to start with a qualitative first, just to get your bearings around how our students or staff or whoever you are assessing understand an issue. I think particularly with a needs assessment, it can be really helpful to start with qualitative if you have focus groups, because it's one of the drawbacks if you start particularly with needs assessments and you're only starting with a survey and you're asking people, what are, rank what you need among these 4 things. It's like, well, who said those were needs anyway for people, right? So if you start with some sort of qualitative information, it can be helpful for you to identify what are some of the key themes that are emerging as needs. And then you can reach out to a broader audience of survey participants to be able to then, rank those needs or, rate, their knowledge around that particular topic or need or whatnot. I think that's probably one of the primary ways in which I think it makes sense to use a qualitative method first over a quantitative method. Now, for the purposes of our membership survey with SAAL, I think it's a little different. We're a little informed already about what are some of the needs. As Marylee said, we have the email listserv, which helps us to kind of, remain knowledgeable about what are some of the key conversations that are happening, at least over email, in addition to previous surveys for the membership that we had information about as well.
Great, thank you. I kept thinking of the term voice, like when is it important to consider voices? And so like the needs, hearing those voices, it may really be important to think about some populations that may not be as representative in a quantitative sample. And so depending on the question, that voice may be necessary to think about too. So now we can talk about the preliminary analysis that the PDC conducted in July. With looking at both of these quantitative and qualitative.
So how we used the preliminary analyses for structured conversations, essentially the structured conversation subcommittee reviewed all of the preliminary results during the summer, and then we identified some of the top topics for us to consider for the fall. one of our primary topics that emerged was technology. But one of the drawbacks is we knew that it was a topic that people were interested in, but we really weren't quite sure what people meant by technology. So that's where we can then, move into how do we get more information about, well, what do people mean by technology? So essentially the group then reviewed some of the top listserv conversations through the archives for the past year to see what kind of technology issues were emerging. So for example, one of those issues were things around predictive analytics. We're hearing a lot more about that. That was something that has come up in conversation a number of times. And then in addition to, once we found out, how are people talking about technology, then we could do a call. We did a call for panelists. So as I said, the ethics of predictive analytics was a topic that emerged. How do we partner with academic affairs on assessment was another topic. Technology systems and applications, different data analysis techniques. So today we're talking about mixed methods. That was something that people wanted to learn a little bit more about. Careers in assessment, particularly trajectories of what do you do after entering into a position, and student affairs assessment. And also assessment as it relates to diversity and inclusion was another topic that emerged from the email archive or the listserv archive for us to consider.
We have a question really quick. When you're starting with qualitative analysis, how do you mitigate any bias that you or the researchers may have?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned early on was not doing assessment in a vacuum. So, it's often difficult to, we can say you need to be aware of your own, biases and your own points of view and perspectives from which you're coming from. So it's really important to include other people who may have some knowledge on a topic, just to kind of review, essentially what your findings are, or even help you read through the data as well. And that's something I know in my work here at the University of Delaware that I've really kind of been enforcing as we work to build a culture of assessment is, bring the results to a staff meeting and ask people, what kind of sense do you make of this? Because if I am the only person who's interpreting data, we're only going to get my perspective on a topic. Now, it could be kind of labor intensive. So you have to, I think, kind of be strategic around how do you involve other people in assessment, particularly analyses. But I think it's worth asking. I think people want to have those conversations. I'd be curious to know what other people's thoughts are about that as well.
Yeah, Nicole, you and I share a brain because I agree. I would often bring results back to colleagues and say, what do you think about this? And I think, there was an example of, we had a student affairs assessment conference, or student affairs conference, and I was on the assessment committee. Of course, I only had one other person that wanted to be on that subcommittee with me. So after our conference was over, we had a celebratory lunch. And before I submitted the executive summary to the division, I brought that report to that lunch and I gave it to everyone. And I think I even emailed it too, or something like that. But I remember a lot of our lunch turned into a discussion of those results. And I took notes down, and I actually used that feedback during lunch to craft my executive summary and make sure that I have recommendations based on the data from other colleagues that were there. And we ate great food that day too. So I just wanted to add that.
That's a really, I think, great way to kind of get the data in front of people and also incorporating the recommendations. I really like that, actually. So I'm going to steal that idea.
Just don't tell them, surprise them. Just bring it.
Yeah, right. Surprise.
And guess what? Here are the results.
See, assessment is fun. No, but I was also going to mention too that I think in terms of mitigating bias, we also need to think about how do you include people in your analysis before you even collect the data. So what are the questions that you're asking in an interview? Making sure that you're not asking them a way that, could be biasing. So thinking about how do you incorporate people really on the continuum of the tasks that are involved with particularly qualitative assessment design.
And I think we can see that with this needs assessment specifically. We had various groups working at different layers, right? So different people in different committees with different years of involvement in student affairs assessment, different years of involvement with SAAL. So I think those questions and that space for the questions and answering and reviewing was really key. And I think Stephanie will talk about later some recommendations that their class saw from the instrument not being involved in the beginning part stages of it and then to the analysis. But that's a really great question, James. Thank you for asking that. So as we think about the preliminary analysis that you were talking about, Nicole, what were some of the challenges with having that preliminary analysis? I think you talked a little bit about this with sometimes they would just maybe use one word and we couldn't quite know what that was. Were there any other challenges that your team saw or we saw?
And Marylee, feel free to chime in.
I didn't want to steal your thunder if you were going to say something right off the bat, but I know one challenge, at least that I saw, is knowing that this just went out. It was mid-July, I believe, and we were only collecting data for a couple of weeks. There's a challenge of how representative is that data going to be? It's middle of the summer. It's only been 2 weeks. We're collecting until I think it was August 31st was the closing date. So we knew we were going to have more data, and it's a time where people go on vacation. So I just think the big challenge is the data that we're kind of taking away now representative, or just we going to see something totally different by the time the survey closes?
I also think a challenge too, I mean, I think again with timing and how important it is to think about the timeline really needed to analyze your data. You know, it might have been helpful for us to really kind of parse out by, you know, years in the profession, exposure to student affairs assessment and so forth, to kind of think about, you know, what really is important for various professionals at different levels. And so I'm just thinking about the timing. That was something that, you know, we didn't have a lot of information about just because of, you know, timing with analyzing the data in that way. So again, I think, you know, moving forward, I think that's something we might do differently, but it could definitely be a challenge if you don't really have the time and you need to make these decisions fairly quickly.
Right, it reminds me of what was our purpose and what were we kind of looking for. And maybe that's a next step or a recommendation for future. So now we will go ahead and switch gears and get into our quantitative analysis results. So we'll turn it over to Stephanie to walk us through some of those things.
Alrighty, well, so I'll talk about the results, findings, and implications of the SAAL's members' needs assessment. And so just to kind of talk about how my class analyzed the data, we broke up into groups, took one of the questions, so one of the quantitative and then one of the qualitative, and then each group had results, and then I took those results and kind of made meaning to those results and kind of tied them all together. So for each question, respondents were asked to indicate how interested they were in the topics and then indicate how knowledgeable they were, which you'll be able to see on each slide. And so 1 being not at all, and then 5 being extremely. And so for question 46, some of the key results that we found were respondents were very interested in learning about technology and assessment and using existing data sources. Were moderately knowledgeable about both of these topics. And then, does anyone have anything to add to that? Okay, so then the next question, for question 48, we noticed that respondents were moderately interested in all of the topics. In addition, respondents were moderately knowledgeable about all of the topics except for 2 of the items. Respondents reported being slightly knowledgeable about meta-analysis and sampling methods. Okay, and then the next slide, question 50, a key takeaway was that respondents were moderately knowledgeable about representing data visually, but were very interested in this topic. One thing that we noticed was the standard deviation in both the level of interest and the level of knowledge categories is low. This indicates that student affairs practitioners who participated in the survey, regardless of their demographic characteristics, demonstrated similar competencies in these areas. And then in question 52, respondents were moderately knowledgeable about partnering with academic affairs and collaborating with institutional research, and moderately interested in these topics. And then respondents were slightly knowledgeable about mapping outcomes, how to conduct observations, and inter-rater reliability, which we found this finding interesting because respondents were also less interested in these topics with the exception of mapping outcomes, but they felt slightly knowledgeable. So. Okay, and then for the qualitative results, these were open-ended questions. And so for the first question, respondents were asked, what other topics would you like student affairs assessment leaders to provide in structured conversations or materials for the resource repository? And some of the key findings that we found were key themes were that people were interested in assessment strategies. So this included collaboration strategies, strategies for assessing different populations of students, strategies for assessing various functional units, and then assessment planning. So people were interested in learning assessment planning concepts for their institution, for their division, for their department, and as an office unit. And then additional assessment resources. People were really interested in learning more about assessment manuals, key indicators or metrics, and just additional helpful websites. And one comment that I think was interesting was someone put that they wanted that student affairs should guide novices to resources to show them that programs, interventions, and products are being rigorously studied and are based in theory. They shouldn't be starting from scratch, which I think shows the needs for those additional assessment resources. And then, so the next slide is some of the major things, or the second question that was asked was just to provide any additional information or thoughts about assessment needs items related to student affairs assessment leaders. And some of the major things that we noticed were that respondents, spoke really positively in regards to the practicality of the information of the listserv. And then they just thought it was a great way to collaborate with other folks. And then some of the challenges were that respondents mentioned were wanting to keep communication communication and timing of programming is something to consider because either there's a lot of emails or the programming doesn't work for their time zones. So, okay. And then I saw a question, sorry. It's on a roll.
That's okay. So we've quickly highlighted the quantitative and qualitative results. And we had a question from the chat. So have we seen an increase in the perception of value attributed to qualitative ways of knowing since incorporating a mixed methods approach? And we can...
I was going to ask, is this question in general with using a mixed methods approach, or particularly just for SAAL in the membership survey?
I'm not sure. Maybe we can answer it in the SAAL lens, and then we can talk about it later generally if we have time.
Okay.
Carrie, can you repeat the question again?
Yes. Have you seen an increase in the perception of value attributed to qualitative ways of knowing since incorporating a mixed method approach?
I don't know. I think it's a hard question just because I feel like it's always a value, right? Nicole, I mean, am I interpreting?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Well, I think particularly with, I think the SAAL membership is a little biased probably. I would hope that, qualitative inquiry is seen of value among this particular community. So my guess would be, yes, I think people would see value because, we should understand really the importance of a mixed methods approach. But I even think more broadly to just even my work, and I go back to the example I shared about late night weekend programming. It was often the qualitative piece that was most compelling for people. In terms of what are the takeaways, when I would hear people talk about the assessment results, among our senior leadership, it often wasn't, oh, remember this chart or this graph, and there was a significant difference here. Like, it was mostly about, wow, I remember, reading this comment from a student, about a student themselves was in recovery. And so having, these, opportunities available was critical, to their success as a student. So I definitely think that it is of value. I'm finding actually more so now, particularly when you pair the qualitative and the quantitative together. I think it just makes such a much more powerful product for someone to digest.
I also want to add too, I think a lot of times we approach qualitative analysis and qualitative projects as kind of being daunting, complex, time consuming, you name it. And, I've definitely encountered some folks, and I've been guilty too. Oh, I really don't want to do that. Why can't we just do a survey? But I think, I know every time for me, and I've had some colleagues, that every time we do delve in and really get involved with that qualitative data, you kind of get lost in it. And by the end of it, you kind of say, wow, I'm really glad we collected that data and looked at it. So I think every time you go through it, it kind of confirms the value and just keeps adding into, and this is why we need to keep doing this. Depending on our assessment question in the future, we can't just leave these methods aside. They really add value.
Right. Some folks are commenting in saying they have seen on their campuses quantitative more valued at times, and often coming from the academic affairs lens, but kind of questioning, like you're just talking about, of that mixed methods approach kind of helps bring some of the qualitative pieces and stories in. I'm curious, Stephanie, you've gone through our quantitative and our qualitative results. I'm curious, we're not quite to our findings yet, but with that initial results that you and your team summarized, were there any discussions around the quantitative and qualitative and blending, or that value piece?
So for us, there were discussions like within our individual groups. We didn't really have like large group conversations about it. So, but I know just trying to, like even in the beginning, like deciding who was going to do what and like what people value more in that sense, I guess that was something that we did kind of talk about. And that's how we divided the data. So, yeah.
That's good. Thank you for the questions from our participants and our commenters. So let's transition and talk about some of the findings from these qualitative and quantitative analysis.
So to put all the findings together, I started looking at the quantitative data and kind of how the qualitative data ties into that. And so one of the things with technology and assessment, we found that respondents, again, noted that they were very interested in learning more about technology and assessment, but moderately knowledgeable. And then some of the quantitative or qualitative responses, people noted like wanting to know trends in technology, used to support the assessment work, using the technology and listserv to provide resources to other members, and like using the SAAL website few examples that we noted. And then for another example that we found was the sampling methods and meta-analysis point. So again, respondents were slightly knowledgeable about meta-analysis and sampling methods. And one respondent noted that they wanted to learn more about meta-analysis through structured conversations. And then in addition, one respondent noted that they wanted to learn more about data collection and analysis samples through the structured conversations as well. So people are interested in these topics. And then for collaboration, collaboration was highlighted with various partners, including academic affairs, instructional research or institutional research, and then other student affairs professionals. And so respondents highlighted wanting to have structured conversation regarding partnering with academic affairs, academic advising assessment, partnering with development and communications, faculty and staff collaboration strategies, and campus assessment. And so there were a lot of people who were really interested in this collaboration piece. And then to jump back to representing data visually, the respondents noted wanting to have structured conversation just about these topics as well. So, and then again, just to highlight a few challenges for some respondents was just that just the timing of like programming and frequency and email. So that's something to consider moving forward. So, and then next we'll move on to the recommendations if there's no questions. Okay, so one of the things that I noticed in my class was considering terminology. I know for my class, some of the terms that were used, we weren't as knowledgeable about, and so maybe considering having ways to define these terms and give those like resources to new professionals. And so one of the examples was everyone was like, what is fidelity? We had no idea. And so we were actually asking Dr. Biddix about it. And so, yeah, that's just one example.
That's actually a really great point. Excellent point, because, we're the people who are creating the survey are people who we're making a lot of assumptions around what people know and so forth. And then that also, I think, signals to the membership of, I think even how welcoming are we? We're very welcoming, I will say. But particularly if you're not as, if you're just kind of getting started out or you just want to learn more about assessment, I could see that being, a major issue if I'm taking a membership survey and I have no clue what you're talking about. Maybe this isn't for me, would be a question someone would be asking.
Yeah, I do appreciate that you and your fellow students, Stephanie, kind of questioned that. When Matt and Kristen and I started talking about that, I mean, they've been in the field a while, and yeah, we are completely guilty of not saying, well, the new professional or the graduate students understand what this means. So sometimes it takes feedback to even realize like, wow, we can improve that instrument the next time. So we're sorry and we'll do better next time. Thank you so much for letting us know.
Yeah. Then the second recommendation that we found was considering just additional trainings and resources, which you can see the various topics that people are interested in, like meta-analysis, sampling, collaborating with other folks. And so that is just something to consider. And then also just highlighting again that some members are starting from scratch or they're the only person in their office. And so that's just something to consider because it will help them be more successful in the field. So, yeah. And then for the third one, just considering collaboration opportunities. I know like my class is a great example of how you can use graduate school students to like further research or just get us practice in the field. But then also just helping find ways to foster collaboration in the field. And then again, just considering timing and communications of programs. So one example is like this YouTube live video. It'll be recorded, so people will be able to watch this later if they want. But yeah, just considering like ways to make SAAL and their resources more accessible to everyone. So yeah.
Multiple structure conversations in a day. Who's ready? I wish we could, because I know SA Chat does that. They have a 1 o'clock and a 7 o'clock.
Wow.
Yeah. So that they could hit folks who kind of work later on the West Coast. I have noticed, though, there is less participation at 7 o'clock, but it is still there. So yeah, hopefully the PDC in the future can try and work with some times and be a little bit more friendly to folks on the West Coast. We know it's difficult. And I'm sure Whitney would agree, because she's in Alaska.
Well, I also, too, I just want to add that how I think one of the really great things about this membership needs assessment was it's actually being used. I think so often we do assessment and nothing happens. And it's really neat to be able to see all of this kind of in action, just even this conversation today, evolve from that particular needs assessment. And I think, while there are things that we would also recommend changing and improving upon in the future with needs assessment, I do think that we're actually applying some strategies that, we deem as important, collaboration, really listening to graduate students who are, maybe not as seasoned in this particular topic area, and so forth. So I think that, I'm just really excited that we're actually using it. And I think, being good stewards of the data.
And Nicole, to add that, we're not even just using it, we're sharing it.
Yes.
We're closing the loop.
Yes.
While addressing the need of mixed methods analysis. So thank you. So as we think about these findings and the results, I just have some questions that maybe we can kind of dive into. What advice or recommendations do you have for individuals as they embark on a mixed methods assessment project?
I have a couple. Just you've probably heard it before, but it always helps me to hear: keep it meaningful, measurable, and manageable. Don't go and have 50 focus groups if you have 2 people to analyze data. And also with that, really consider what are some of the ways, especially if you really want to bring in the qualitative, because I know from my colleagues, a lot of what I heard again is trying to get that qualitative piece because it seems so complex, daunting, time consuming. Look at what data exists. And that, talk to your IOR office, see what they have. And not only that, talk to some of your unit directors and key players throughout your division. You might find that they're engaging in focus groups or interviews and they have data and they might be willing to share it. And especially if it becomes a joint analysis thing, everyone's life is being made, a little bit easier. The work becomes a little bit more manageable. So have those conversations with colleagues to see what might be collected right now, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel and make it manageable so that we are using the results and we are sharing them.
I think tied to that, Marylee, we have a question in the chat. Do you have any tips to entice or bring faculty in to assist with assessment and student affairs? I think that kind of speaks to what you were saying. Have you all had that experience of bringing faculty in on these assessment projects for mixed methods?
In my experience, I feel as though we still kind of stayed a little too separate from academics. I remember a couple of instances with like some student life clubs and organizations that were a little bit more tied to classes, but not really so much faculty involvement. And I do think that it is an area that we do need to get into, but sometimes it can be hard to bridge those partnerships.
I think that if you're working on a particular topic that is of interest, whether it be through a research center on your campus or an individual faculty member's research interest, I think that, kind of knowing who those people are, I think well in advance of when you need someone's assistance or, need their input around the assessment that particular assessment project or initiative, I think is really key of just kind of making those relationships in advance. When you think about the late night weekend programming initiative, I reached out to our Center for Health Studies, which actually collects a lot of data for the institution as well as the state around alcohol consumption and high-risk drinking. And they already had a partnership in student affairs with our student wellness area. But it was really important to, make sure that I made that connection as well with the center staff, and which is, housed within academic affairs, because that's an issue and a topic that was of interest to them. And then also to making sure that we can look at our data in comparison to this other instrument, making sure that our questions were similarly worded and whatnot. So that actually was a really beneficial partnership to have in moving forward from the academic affairs area.
That's great. What particular considerations must be made when you're conducting a mixed methods assessment? I think we've talked some things a little bit: time, sources of data, who's maybe collecting and analyzing the data. Are there any other considerations that you want to make sure we talk about?
I think knowing your own expertise. Through training, I would not consider myself a strong qualitative researcher. And I think that, I have to, be mindful of really, what are my own limitations, and what I'm trying to do. So this is where it might be good to partner with, someone else, or maybe it's your assessment committee takes it on so that you're kind of sharing essentially the load. But I think that's one thing. I think oftentimes we do not check in with ourselves to make sure that, we actually have the expertise to get the job done.
I think another thing is just, I'm sorry, I'm being interrupted for a second here, and I lost my train of thought. I think considering like your question and especially the method. So, and that kind of goes in with expertise, Nicole, really asking, is this the best way? Or is there another way? And really getting creative. Are you doing something on your campus that is generating data that you didn't really think it might generate data? And an example of that, just from Rutgers, one day some students were really ticked off about the dining hall food. So they wrote a comment on a napkin and they stuck it on the wall in the dining hall. They managed to put up a cork board, and for years, the napkin board is what it became known as. It was completely, wow, look at that. A student left a comment on a cat napkin. This is a great idea. Let's make a space where they could actually do that and let them know, like, it's creative, it's new. So kind of look for some of these things that are going on campus and say to yourself, hey, can I grow that into a way to collect comments from students without exhausting them with a survey?
One other thing I would add is knowing your audience. We kind of touched on this earlier in the conversation around, what resonates with people. I think one of the beauties of mixed methods research and assessment is that there's something for everyone in it. And so I think that your findings will then resonate, with multiple audiences. So I think that's something to, take into consideration of, what do you really need for the audience?
In your work, do you work with undergraduate students in supporting your mixed methods approaches at all? If so, how does that look? It's a question from our chat.
Trying to think, because a lot of my work with undergraduate students was through clubs and organizations, and they're running their own assessments. So that's where I've kind of interacted with students and helped them because they're with a club or organization and they want to know how are they doing. So that's been my undergraduate experience. But I think social media could play a really great role here for involving students and engaging students, because they are on Instagram, they are on Twitter, they're not really on Facebook anymore from what I understand. But, just how can social media maybe get them engaged?
Are there topics or results that you as panelists were surprised to see or maybe not to see?
I was I can't really say I'm surprised. I am, but I'm not. I guess my big surprise are some topics that are coming up. We definitely had some structured conversations on them. I remember we had one about sampling a couple years ago. We had predictive analytics. So, but we're seeing it come up again. But then when I thought about it, I'm not really surprised, because this is a group of professionals that wants to do their best at what they do, and they want to do good work. And they know that things keep changing. You all know that things keep changing. And to see that, I learned about sampling and now it's a one and done. I don't need to know that again. That's not what this group is about. So that's the part that doesn't surprise me, that, we still want to stay current. We still want to keep learning more. Even though we learned about it last year, we want to know what's new. So I guess that would be my surprise.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, how necessary it is that sometimes we just need to return to the basics of, having that foundation there. And like you said, that never gets old. And also keeping in mind that we always have new people coming into the group as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that with the new people coming in. I'm like, how did I find different things? Or do we have it easily accessible to know this is how you look at the archive structured conversation? So I think that'll be a good thing that our PDC can kind of think about too, moving forward. Other topics or results? Well, I'm going to chat in a question for our audience participants. And while I'm chatting that in, I have a question from the audience that I thought maybe you all could talk about while we're kind of waiting for a delay to happen. But can you tell us, this is from a participant, James, can you tell us about your specific roles on your campuses, how much of your job is dedicated to assessment, and how much help do you have?
Oh, wow. So my specific role, I'm the Director of Assessment and Engagement in Student Life at the University of Delaware. I'm the only person whose job is to work at the division level for assessment. There are a couple of units who, among our 12 departments, that have people who are dedicated to working on assessment within their particular unit. But otherwise, at the division level, it's just me. So, and this is 100% of my job function.
Thank you.
I'm currently doing a lot of consulting, so I don't have an institutional home at the moment, but I could speak to my previous institutional homes. And Rutgers, much like Nicole, I was the divisional assessment person. Throughout my unit, we had some units that had, dozens of employees. They might even have some folks that had assessment responsibilities. So if I was working with that particular unit, yeah, I had help because there was an assessment person there. But some of our smaller units, there wasn't an assessment person, or even the people working there, they know a little bit about research and assessment, but they're not experts. So at the divisional level, it was kind of all me. But when it came down to some units, I did have some support. At Cumberland County College, we had a student services division that I think wasn't as robust, mainly because it was a community college. We didn't have students living there. We weren't, much smaller in terms of student services. So even there, it was kind of all me. And I had academics on top of it and administration. And so it was kind of like a little difficult, and I probably had less support there, but I was able to find some folks on campus that did know their stuff. And as soon as I found out who they were, I became really good friends with them. And I spent a lot of time with them because they knew the institution in many cases. Several of them were actually there for a couple of decades, and I was kind of new, and they were really helpful to me.
Building relationships is key from what I hear from both of you.
Absolutely.
So our question for our viewers I posed in the chat was, where do you think SAAL goes from here with these results? I haven't received any chats yet, but do you as panelists have some ideas of where SAAL goes from here?
We're just going to do the typical thing and shelve them away and never look at them again. No, I'm hopefully, now that you've seen some of our results that we discussed today, I hope that you feel that some of the conversations we've offered this fall are meeting your needs. We're also going to take to heart some of your suggestions to get some more resources available in the repository. I also think that this will help inform some future Journal of Student Affairs inquiry pieces. And one thing that I think was really helpful was many thanks to all of you that shared your assessment office. If you follow us on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, you'll see that last week I shared the page where you can find that information. So we've done a few things. We're looking at some others, but we'd love to know what you think we should do with the results.
I think one thing that keeps kind of coming to the forefront for me is scaffolding. So using these needs assessment results to think about how do we scaffold professional development opportunities within SAAL, and how do we kind of make that known for our members. So that's something that kind of was like, oh yeah, maybe we should think more about that, in terms of the topic. So it's not so, loaded for a more senior professional or someone who's only working at the division level or whatnot. So something I think would be kind of cool for us to consider moving forward.
Stephanie, do you have any thoughts?
I think, well, so as a grad student, I think definitely just keeping in mind the professionals, sorry, words are hard, that are going to be using these resources. And also just, I think, getting the word out to other professionals. I was at a conference last week and I gave a shout out to SAAL. And so I think some professionals are like, I didn't even know that existed. And so I think just also like getting the word out to other professionals in the field as well.
That's great. So. Thank you. All right. Any final thoughts as we conclude today's structured conversation? Okay. Well, it's a little after 1. And so if I don't see any questions from our watchers and our viewers and our chatters. So as we conclude today's session, we just want to thank you, Marylee, Nicole, and Stephanie, and the SAAL Professional Development Committee for their help in bringing today's conversation. And we really would like to thank Dr. Patrick Biddix and the students from the Assessment and Student Affairs graduate course at University of Tennessee, Knoxville for all of their work in the data analysis process and the recommendations and findings sections for this needs assessment. Our recorded conversation, our structured conversation, and associated materials will be sent along in a link, and you'll be able to provide feedback that will be shared with you. So this link will be shared with you via email, and it will also be available on the SAAL's website. So this will be available for those that weren't able to join us today. And we want to hope that you'll mark your calendars for our next structured conversation on December 5th, when Leslie D'Souza and Julia Smead will talk about data storytelling using design thinking models. So thank you again to our panelists. It was a wonderful conversation, and I hope that everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.